This is Chris Morrow at Comic-Con at home, and I'm remotely connected from the Tin Fish. The panel is celebrating 80 years of Will Eisner's The Spirit. Hello.
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 All right, please introduce yourself and tell me where your home is.
I'm Danny Fingeroth. I'm the moderator of the panel. I've been in and around comics a lot. I'll plug some stuff later. But anyway, I am right now in New England, but my home is generally New York, but I'm kind of fluid in my whereabouts. But I'm in the Berkshire Mountains, as you can tell by the beautiful background here. Dennis Kitchen?
Hi, Dennis Kitchen. I'm like Danny in New England. I'm in the middle of a forest in western Massachusetts.
And I'm Dan Scotti. I'm calling from Indianapolis, Indiana.
Wow.
So tell me how the panel went.
I just watched it, because we couldn't see it tonight. Except for me, I thought it went great. I personally can't stand watching and hearing myself, but everybody else was really smart and appropriate and full of information. So yeah, I was pleased, and I was thrilled that even though we went almost 20 minutes over, that they let the panel run. I didn't know if they would do like arbitrary editing or what, but it was just, and I want to thank Travis Langley, who's a great comic scholar and psychology professor, who was the tech guy behind it and made it all work. So I thought it went great.
Yeah, no, I thought the editing was seamless. I thought everybody sounded pretty good. I regretted taking a shower shortly before the panel, but like slowly over the course of the hour, my hair returned to something like normal.
Yeah. I've never done one that was delayed like this. For years I've been doing live panels, of course, and so this was a bit of an experiment, given the crazy times we're in. So, given that, yeah, I thought it went well.
Aside from that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? Yeah, it was given the weird circumstances, yeah, I was very pleased.
For those that don't know about The Spirit, if you can tell us about it, please.
Dennis, I think.
Well, it was Will's first really major success in 1940. He's still in his early 20s. He had been successful already starting in his late teens. He was unbelievably accomplished throughout his life, but he was packaging comics for larger publishers in the late 30s with a partner when Will was approached by a Midwest syndicate about doing what became The Spirit. So at a very early age, he took on a great responsibility, and it turned out to be one of the more iconic creations in comics history. And not only that, at a very early age, he insisted on having equity in it, which was unheard of for syndicated strip. And so when the strip was finally retired, Will owned 100% of it.
Was one of the pioneers of comics, as Dennis said, in the 30s and 40s. And people were imitating him and very eager to work in his studio. And then the amazing thing about him, as we discussed in the panel, is that he kind of revolutionized comics in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and then kind of kept doing comics, but not in the mainstream spotlight, more stuff for corporate and military clients, but then reinvented himself and the medium in the 70s with I think it was Paul who unfortunately couldn't make it to this post-game show, but Paul Levitz, who had said at the original panel that it was the first graphic novel that made a difference. I forget exactly. So he didn't invent the term, but with Contract with God in 78, and then for the next 25 years, really reinvented the medium. And I think as Paul said, very few of us get to even invent a medium once, or to be groundbreaking once. To do it twice, especially the second time, at a point in most professionals' life in any field where they kind of settle into a groove and just kind of coast, where Will upset his whole apple cart of a pretty, well, I mean, there was, he had a daughter die that was a very traumatic experience in his life, and made art out of it, and in so doing, revolutionized the medium for a second time.
That's something that's so cool about reading the original Spirit stories in the context of his later work, because the Spirit, in terms of what the strip actually is it's a superhero cop comic where everything kind of has to follow the formula of there's a criminal, the Spirit catches him, and there's some sort of wry conclusion. So as the strip goes on and Eisner starts wanting to incorporate, Eisner and his team start wanting to incorporate these more literary ideas, it's really fun to see him take something like, a story like the famous 10 Minutes story, in which we follow a man, the last 10 minutes of a man's life as he makes the worst decision of his life that leads to his death. How do you fit that into a like cops and robbers story? So you see the graphic novels Eisner would eventually create, like trying to burst out of the cage of having to be a Spirit story.
Right. And in between creating the Spirit and the graphic novel, the modern graphic novel, in between he basically pioneered educational comics, starting with the U.S. Army and then for various corporate and governmental clients. So it's an amazing career that spanned, from his teens until he was almost 90.
Well, was the Spirit well received at first?
Well, it was a syndicated insert. It was unlike any other, was neither fish nor fowl, because it was essentially a coverless comic book inserted in subscribing Sunday newspapers. At its peak, it was in papers with about a 5 million readership. So if everyone read it, it would have been, 5 times higher circulation than a Batman or a Superman or anything equivalent. So successful in that regard, but you have to measure it in different ways because it was a unique format.
It was certainly very influential on other comic book artists. If you read a lot of Golden Age comics from the 40s and the early 50s, you will see countless different artists copying Eisner panels. And if you're read in the Spirit, you'll see those compositions and sometimes entire characters just taken from the Spirit and used in other comics. So if nothing else, it was definitely like a cartoonist's cartoon.
Yeah, I mean, in 5 million circulation, I mean, even if only a third of the people who got the paper read it, that's still a couple of million readers. It was an attempt by a newspaper syndicate to cash in on this comic book fad that all the kids were crazy about in the late 30s, early 40s, to cash in on Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and all the other genres that were popular in comics. And I guess, maybe they felt it was leeching away readers from them, but also here was this potential audience. And how do we do something that's like these comic books? And the answer was to experiment with this comic book size and format insert that would come in your Sunday newspaper. Did anybody else ever do an insert like that besides the Register and Tribune Syndicate?
I don't believe so.
So, that might be part of your answer. But it's certainly, as these guys both said, Eisner was the cartoonist. He was somebody people wanted to work with, in some cases directly swipe layouts from. And, Eisner was somebody looked up to. And maybe the first person in quote unquote mainstream comics to refer to comics as an art form. I think a lot of people saw it as a stepping stone to something else, and I don't think Will did. I think Will saw comics as his life's work. Even in his 20s, he seemed to recognize that.
Was he serious about his work, or was he having fun with it? Was he You know how a lot of times actors don't really want to watch themselves in the movie? You know, was he someone that would reread his work?
It's an interesting question. Do you know?
I think Will both had fun and took it seriously. He used to refer to himself, as Danny said, way back in 1941. He talked about the potential of the medium being literate and artistic when no one, absolutely no one else was talking in those terms. And in looking back, he said it was pretentious to say that, and other professionals called him pretentious, but he didn't think that was a bad thing, that comics and cartoonists should aspire to be more than just children's entertainment and a gag that you wrap the fish with the next day. He really thought it could be a unique hybrid, and he spent his life basically proving it.
He didn't seem to take himself terribly seriously. Whenever he'd appear in the spirit, like his face would always be in shadow. He'd always be hunched over a desk, sweating a deadline. Definitely had a lot of levity when it came to himself.
Well, the classic is, of course, when, you know, actually now that there are a lot, but especially when Pfeiffer assassinates him in the comic and takes over the strip from him.
Yep.
You know, as we point out in the panel, certainly Eisner's revenge might have been to make Jules look pretty not that attractive in it, but Eisner himself, you know, he doesn't go out with a lot of dignity. He's kind of at his drawing board, desperate, you know, to make a deadline and to come up with an idea, you know, and Jules comes in and shoots him in the back.
What would you think about, you know, now Marvel being so big and all the movies and the style, the artistic style of comics now?
He certainly didn't really care at all about the movies. He thought comics was a medium unto itself. It did not need film adaptations. When his own movie was finally made into an adaptation, he wasn't well that interested in it. The first time it wasn't very well adapted, nor was it the second time. It wasn't important to him. It was the comics that were important.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, you know, Will didn't like superheroes at all. He had no interest in them. He gave the spirit a mask and the gloves because the syndicate said to him, it's got to be, I think they called them costumed adventurers at that time. So that was not his interest. I think what Will would have been thrilled about was the explosion of the graphic novel, you know, and the medium of comics is so diverse and so everything but superheroes, you know, the fact that, say, there's Raina Telgemeier selling millions of copies of her YA graphic novels for Scholastic, or Spiegelman's Mouse, or what Dennis is doing at Dark Horse, or what Dan is doing. You know, I think that is what gave Will, you know, why he lent his name to the Eisner Awards and why he devoted a lot of his life to educating. Honestly, the fact that Marvel's making a lot of money on movies, I think he couldn't have cared less. You know, I think the graphic novel explosion and that there's another generation of kids who now know and love comics in whatever genre, I think that would have thrilled him. You know, that, you know, the fate of Iron Man was not really of much concern to Will Eisner.
Well, on that note, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I'm Chris Morrow, Comic-Con at home, remotely connected from the Tin Fish. And we miss you, and we hope to see you at Comic-Con again next year. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to talk to you all.
Thank
And
you.
you. Have a good one.
San Diego!